Everyone, welcome back to another round of Ken Reads, the segment where I take your letter about your dating experience and share my 2 cents as to what the hell just happened. It may seem a bit strange that I'm doing 2 lives in a row today. Because I'm just slowly getting back into things with work, life, and everything. I was feeling a bit restless and I thought, I actually have the energy for another live and I'd be happy to do this one. And this one is a very, 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 very relatable and good letter. And I'm very keen to read it out in just a hot second. As always, just as we're getting the ground rules, if you have any questions for me, feel free to throw them in the question mark box below. I cannot promise that I'll be doing lives, this frequently going forward, but today is just a bit of an exception to the rule, and I figured I'm happy to facilitate a few more today just because I can and because, I really appreciate those of you who actually trust me to talk about your stuff, anonymously as well too. So anyways, let's get into it. So the person who's written this letter, I'm going to call them Kate to respect their anonymity, and we'll get straight into this. Okay, so they say, I met my ex online during the pandemic. We talked for hours and became best friends, even though she didn't know what I looked like because I was covered in bandages due to a gender change from going from male to female. After 6 months, we started video calls and I suggested that we met in Europe where I was moving to. She came, fell in love, and we quickly became a couple. She was heterosexual, so it surprised me, but it felt amazing to be accepted, so I didn't question it. A month later, I visited her. On the last day of an awesome trip, she said, I don't love you, and that I reminded her of her family. I felt devastated. While I cried at the airport, she remained emotionless. Once I was home, she called me with, I love you and I can't imagine life without you. Now, she wanted to move in with me, and after long talks, I said yes. During surgeries, all my friends and my family abandoned me, and my best friend died of cancer. So I felt vulnerable and not ready to lose another person. For the next 7 months, our life was harmonious, and we were madly in love. However, she was forced to go back to her country. I offered to go with her, and she seemed ecstatic about it. But once I did, she stopped showing affection in public, introduced me as just a friend, and each month she withdrew even more. Sex became dull and later non-existent. I became anxious. Any attempts to fix things were met with, you're needy. The only time there was peace was when I didn't express when something bothered me. I wanted our old life back. A year passed when she admitted that she had given up on the relationship a long time ago. We had many talks about raising children, getting married, and she even picked a church, so another shock. Fast forward, she left to Asia for a long trip. Talking became sporadic, she attempted to cheat, I thought it was the end, but after 4 months, I invited her to Vietnam to rekindle the friendship. After much hesitation, she came. We had a wonderful 3 weeks together, and she acted like we were a couple. On last night, she had a panic attack, yelling that she is traumatized by my needs and that we are incompatible. On the way to the airport, she was cold and emotionless. After leaving, she only showed love once when she was sick and needed my help. But once she got better, she withdrew again and started avoiding me. I ended the relationship via text once talking became impossible. The experience left me with a huge trauma that I find hard to recover from. We had a 13-year age difference, but regardless, I gave it my whole heart, yet it seems the outcome was unavoidable. I since then discovered attachment theory, and while it helps me work on myself and to recognize such people, my broken heart remains. P.S. I understand attachment theory pretty well. So, in your opinion, I'm hoping for tips on how to heal from such an experience because it's been 5 months now and I find myself self-isolating because every second person I meet shows avoidant tendencies. Okay, Kate, thank you very much for sharing that with me. And my God, that was a very relatable, intense, and full-on experience that you've been through. And I'm very, very, very sorry that you've gone through this for a lot of reasons. I've worked with a lot of clients who've had similar sounding stories where, they've had a lot of intense connection with the person that they've been with. Like, the person they've interacted with is, like up there as a best friend of sorts. And it feels as though they're getting much, much closer. Now, I also want to add something for context too. Kate talks about how they were going through a gender transition throughout this entire period too. So I could imagine, it's very understandable that if you're going through such a process that, you'd be hoping that you are accepted, that you are loved, just as you are at the end of the process. And so I could imagine that if you're coming out now as a woman and you're with someone who's seemingly very into you and is giving you a lot of green flags, you would hope that they also, at the end of this arduous journey, continue to love and accept you for who you are, which they seem to have done throughout, the early stages of dating. And it seems like when you were together, things were going really, really well. And I could imagine wanting to hold on to this because if you've experienced a lot of alienation as you've gone through this transition, if you've experienced a lot of people who are discriminating against you or they don't accept what you're going through, then I could imagine that you'd want to hold on to those that are actually very loving, caring, supportive of what you're experiencing in this process. And it seems like this person that you dated, was, even though they said they were heterosexual, they were very supportive and loving of you, which is amazing. But I think what's terrible about this is that, and this is classic across gender and sexuality, what I find so interesting, so typical, is you'd spent this really intense emotional period together, where then at the end of it, this is when she came out with the, oh, I don't love you, and was cold and distant and seemingly just not into you anymore. That's frightening to have that happen to you, because if you've just spent a very intense, emotionally strong time with another individual who you are dating romantically, for them to come out at the end of a very intense holiday period with, I don't love you, that is a huge bombshell to go through. Then subsequently, what makes this one particularly gnarly is that at the end of this, you were crying, she was emotionless at the airport, but then once you're back home, she hits you with a, I love you and I can't imagine my life without you. WTF is going on? I would be so confused, and on one hand, I would also be maybe feeling tremendous relief, thinking, oh, okay, it was all in my head. Maybe this wasn't such a big problem. Maybe we can find a way to connect and get together. Because it's pretty jarring to, have the shock of, I don't love you, to then, I love you and I can't see you outside of my life. Like, that's a pretty big double whammy to get. And I'm going to just say now, we have now entered well and truly into fearful avoidant territory. Like, this is very typical sort of hot and cold intense stuff you would normally see in someone who leans more in that fearful avoidant sort of camp in the severe end. And then what's really interesting is that subsequently she's telling you how she wants to move in with you, that she could see herself, picking out the church for marriage with you. And when you offered to go, to her home country, she's ecstatic, she's happy about it. But then over time, she becomes withdrawn, stops introducing you as a lover and says that you're just a friend. And sex is not particularly good. And that, any attempts to fix this, you're hit with, you're needy. Not okay. Not okay at all. You both were in a romantic relationship. And even if it may not have been a traditional relationship, to seemingly just erase what you are together to make her feel more comfortable inside of herself, that is not okay, and you don't do that. It would be one of the most, hurtful things, it would be an act of betrayal to basically go out. Imagine you're dating someone, right, who you think is your romantic partner, and they introduce you to their social circle as, oh, this is my friend. Do you know how hurtful that would be after you spent such intimate time together? It's mad, like it's just, insanity inducing to go through that, where you're basically told, yeah, I don't actually love you. I treat you and act like, I'm your romantic partner, but I'm going to declare you as a friend to my social circle just to make myself feel better. Not okay at all. And so bad to be trying to control the narrative of your relationship like that. So not okay at all. And then I see here, as I mentioned earlier, that they're trying to tell you that your attempts to fix this are being too needy. Jesus Christ. Just no. No. There's nothing needy about trying to fix a relationship. Now, granted, I don't know how you went about it. I don't know how you were trying to approach this, but it's very common for a lot of severe fearful avoidance to basically degrade their partner by saying you're being too needy when in fact they're not being needy at all. It's a common form of projection that a lot of fearful avoidance do to their partners. Anyways, let's continue. We can then see that, you've tried to rekindle this friendship, even though you weren't friends, you were lovers. And after having such an amazing 3 weeks together, just like your initial holiday that you described, she basically has this panic attack where she's feeling traumatized by your needs and that we're incompatible. To me, when I hear that, that just makes me think that, she's obviously had a history where she's probably being controlled by very needy people, and she's projecting a lot of that onto you, even though you probably haven't shown any evidence of being needy. I want to make a statement here that often at times we tell our clients, trust your body knows best. Often at times, when something is bad for you, but I have to tell you, if you're someone with an insecure attachment, particularly an avoidant attachment, you can sometimes be tricked by the signals your body and your brain tell you. It is very easy to have these misconstrued wirings go off where it tells you, maybe I'd be better off being single. Maybe my partner's not good enough for me, and so on. And you may start to try and find excuses to end a relationship with your partner that you're seeing. And if you do that and then claim, well, my body was telling me that this wasn't right for me, on one hand, you're probably not wrong, but those signals that you're receiving may not necessarily be, giving you accurate information about what is happening between you and the person that you're seeing. So be mindful of that. And to me, when I read this with what Kate's describing, I just sort of think, Jesus Christ, it seems like this person just did not like the idea of getting more intimate with you, and they just blew this entire thing up, which is terrible. And I'm sorry that you were the one who had to end this relationship over text. I could only imagine that you probably tried everything in your power up until that point to try and make it work. And it sounds to me like your partner wasn't even open to, trying to facilitate a repair conversation. So yeah, not good at all. That is pretty bad that you had to get to that point where you're ending a relationship over a text. Still, I get it, because if you've had to reach that point, it sounds to me like there was nothing else you could do. Let's talk about tips on how to recover, because that is a very hard question to answer in a short amount of time, but I'm going to do my best to explain this. Generally speaking, you can come to me, you can look online, you can read about attachment theory and get a better understanding as to why someone might have behaved the way they have for validation. And it's healthy. It's good to be validated. But the thing is that when it comes to healing off the back of this experience, particularly if this is your first time going through this, it is a labored experience of emotional processing, grieving, allowing yourself to mourn that person that you thought you knew and that person you thought you loved. And I think it's really important to understand that if you are going through this experience where you're taking your time to really heal and recover from this, you have to be exactly where you're at right now emotionally. If people around you are telling you, you need to hate on your ex and you just need to get over them, you're not going to. It's going to make things a lot worse. I think that what you need to do is, if you're at a phase where you still miss and you care for them, go ahead and write tons of letters to them which you do not send them. Write out how you feel about, this person. It's really important in this healing experience to grieve, to, when it feels appropriate, have rage about how they behaved and how it made you feel, to also question, why did I put up with this? But that comes a bit later. And fundamentally, it's about creating your own truth over your experience with this. So many people have been inadvertently gaslit by the avoidant partner in their life that they've been made to feel like this was all in my head and I just made this entire thing up. But I think the key thing that you have to consider doing for your sanity is also going back to, what are the facts of this experience? What did I go through? How did it affect me? What did I just experience? And does my narrative line up with how I feel about the experience? So please, 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 take the time to honor the journey that you're going through with this. And frankly, I would recommend you speak to a professional, because mental health professionals, who have an understanding of attachment issues and grief should be able to support you through this. Hell, you can even speak to one of my team members about it as well too. But I think it's important. I can see someone here says, I feel like healing is lifelong. Anger is too strong for the way we were mistreated and gaslit. I was going to say, I find that when it comes to the anger, you can just, there's tons of room for that, and it can take a long time to process that. But I got to tell you, it's very cathartic to get that off your chest. Do not have repressed rage. It leads to depression and a whole bunch of other things. So please enjoy taking every ounce of your anger out on paper or with a therapist, because it does help you. And I can also see someone here has said, do not gaslight yourself into taking any more responsibility for their shit. Completely agree. I think it's really important to understand that you need to own your side of the street for this. And though you may not be ready to do that in its entirety, owning your street does not mean owning their bad behavior. Owning the way this person, was saying to you at the end of a great holiday, I don't love you. It doesn't mean taking accountability for when, this person also, when you got back home, was saying to you, I love you and I can't see myself with anyone else. And then subsequently going through episodes of making you feel like you're a bad person. Not okay. You don't own that. That is not your job to own. One day down the line, you might get to a point where you're like, okay, why did I choose this particular person? Or what was it around the time that I was going through that led to this experience? But that's why I think it's really important that you focus for now on really making sure that you separate yourself from this person's bad behavior, because it is very easy, believe me, I've seen it happen way too often, been there, done that, bought the shirt, for us to internalize, personalize these very erratic and very extremely, traumatic behavior from other people, making me think, they did that because of me. I'm the problem. I must be the problem because they did this to me. And the answer is no. You are not at fault because someone just decided to finish a holiday and say to you, I don't love you anymore. That's a terrible thing to say to someone. And if they were truly feeling that way, they should have brought that up ages before that feeling hit them. And even if it was truly a case of fear of intimacy, which does cause temporary feelings of, not being into a partner, there should have been way more communication around it. So, yeah. I can see someone here has also added, I must have done this. What if I had said that instead? The rumination off the back of this is just such a head fuck. It's terrible to be going, if I had done this, maybe things could have been different. If I hadn't texted that one message, maybe they wouldn't have behaved in this particular way. It is so, so painful to go through that rumination cycle of what happened. And I think that, one thing that this particular person who wrote to me, Kate wrote to me, that I think is significant is we often dwell in the, let's understand the other person, which does happen and it's part of the healing process. But I think we forget also the way in which they break up with us is arguably one of the most, or the way in which, that ending happens is one of the most painful, if not the most painful part of this entire experience. So I think it's really important to understand that the way in which they often end this, and I know you, Kate, you had ultimately decided to end this via text at the very end, but you had technically gone through variations of breakups with this person leading up to that point as well. Just that sudden 180, it's so fucking devastating to someone's nervous system, mental and emotional well-being. And it really is life-altering off the back of it too. I mean, I'd like to say in theory that it won't be part of your identity, but realistically speaking, you're not going to go back to who you were before this experience. It's pretty bad. And you also mentioned at the end of your letter that you find it hard to overcome self-isolation because everyone you see outside has avoidant tendencies. Yeah, well, it makes sense because you're probably on high alert off the back of that. I often tell a lot of my clients who've just been fresh off the back of this that if you have your walls up, it is okay. And it's not going to be like that forever. But if you need time to have your walls up off the back of having a bad experience with an avoidant attacher, it's normal, fine, for a period of time. You won't be like this forever. But I'm going to tell you now, there are so many people who have strong avoidant tendencies, the full-blown attachment, and it's not in the good, healthy ways. So, yeah, just want to say I can understand the concerns that you have. All right. Thank you, Kate, for sharing your letter with me. I thought it was great. I also want to take a moment to say, as someone who's part of the LGBTQIA plus community, if anyone wants to share their story who aren't part of the straight group of people, you're very welcome to send stuff to me because I gotta tell you, I read a lot, hear a lot of LGBT-related attachment stuff all the time. And even though the stories can be very similar, there are some nuances that are distinct for our side of the street and still worth a listen from anyone, even if you're not necessarily part of the alphabet soup community. In any case, if you have any questions for me, feel free to leave them in the question mark box below. I'm going to start diving into this and we can just take it from here. I noticed there was also some stuff in the chat and I'll get to that too. All right. What to do when the what if monster hits and wonder if it was or wasn't inevitable. Okay, so people may have listened to me in previous lives where I've talked about what I call the what if monster, kind of up there with the inner critic, right? So if the inner critic is that part of us that goes, you should have done this differently. They think you're needy. They think you're too much. You weren't attractive to be with this person. If they wanted to, they would. They're just not that into you. That's your inner critic, right? And then the what if monster is more of the, what if I had not sent that text message? What if I had maybe shown up differently that day? What if I never brought up the relationship with this person? What if I never pushed for exclusivity? Could things have been different? The what if monster specifically is an annoying, anxiety-based part of us that is trying to, at times, I think, make us feel, in its own misguided way, it's trying to, at times, I think, make us feel like we're being a good person and trying to get along with difficult people from time to time. And I think when it comes to some of the what ifs we throw out there, it's like, but what if they weren't avoidantly attached? What if they really knew what they wanted? It's almost this thing of trying to attack us and make it seem like, but what if I'm the crazy one and I need to work on myself, because then it would give you some sort of, control over this sort of situation. And it would give you a reason to hold on to your victimhood in that particular way. And it's like, no. I got to tell you, most of the time, you are not crazy. The what if monster often comes up with a bunch of crap like, what if they decided to find someone better than me? What if they weren't that into me at all? And it's like, okay, what if monster? So this is how you challenge it. You go, is that true? Let's look at the evidence of what this person did. Okay, worst case scenario, I'm crazy. I will submit myself to therapy and go through, an evaluation of the entire experience. And if you're with a competent therapist, I'm pretty sure they're going to validate you and say, yeah, I don't think you're nuts. I think you were dealing with someone who was nuts and made you feel nuts as a consequence. And I think it's one of those things where if you're second guessing yourself by the what if monster, chances are you've probably grown up in an invalidating, gaslighting household with someone who was at the very least a bit narcissistic. I speak this from experience, that if you have grown up with a pretty egregious what-if monster, chances are it's because you're used to a lot of invalidation and you have a tendency to invalidate yourself to try and, maintain the status quo of, a difficult childhood environment. So great question. But I think it's one of those things where it is about trying to teach yourself you need to stick up for your reality, for what you feel happened, even though it can be very hard when you just engage with a very invalidating experience, especially if you dated an avoidant who's not taking ownership for their side of the street, which does unfortunately happen a lot when you're dealing with the severely avoidantly attached people. All right, next question. After our breakup, and by the way, guys, as you can probably hear, my voice is probably about to die, but I'm going to see how far I go before I'm like, okay, I can't do this anymore. All right, next person says, after our breakup, my ex told me I was still so important to her. She ghosted after 3 months. Why? Because if this person had an avoidant attachment, which we suspect they probably do, then chances are that they got really close to you. They didn't feel particularly comfortable after this big admission of how much they loved you, and it freaked them out, and they then ghosted you. It's pretty baffling to think that someone who's shown such big displays of love and affection would then subsequently treat you like the scum of the earth. But unfortunately, this is very typical avoidant behavior. They push good people away. Why? They don't want to be known. They don't want you close to them. Even if they're after connection and love, they do not want you to be that near them as human beings because it terrifies the living daylights out of them. They do not want you to understand what is going on internally inside of them. They have tremendous shame about who they are, and the last thing they want is that level of intimacy with someone who can really see them for their, for all of their stuff. And much of the stuff that they're fearing is probably not as bad as they think it is, but they make it out like they are unworthy, unlovable, not worth, moments of anyone's attention and time. But, because they make this such a big issue, they push people away because they don't want you to get that close. So, unfortunately, this is a very, very common experience that people have from avoidant attachers, and I'm very sorry for your experience because it is terrible. Terrible to have someone tell you, I love you, and then be subsequently ghosted by that person. Frankly, it's cruel. It's not fair. It's not okay. It's traumatizing. It's part of betrayal trauma, and you don't deserve to go through that because it's essentially being treated like trash, so it's not okay. All right, next person. Someone here has said, I was very calm during deactivation. He laid in my lap and said he was struggling in his body. He really opened to me 2 days later, and then there was a breakup. Okay, so I'm assuming that you were calm during his deactivation, and as he was laying on your lap and opening up about the struggles he was experiencing internally, really opening up to you, and then 2 days later he broke up with you. I'm just going to say I'm not surprised because this is very common, even for us clinicians, to have avoidant clients who open up to us and then we never hear from them again in the future. Why? Because we got in too deep into something that they were just not prepared to commit to. I have heard this story so many times, and it really is very tragic for a lot of people because you feel like, okay, I finally got my boyfriend, partner, girlfriend to open up and be vulnerable with me. Hell, they've got their head on my lap. That's a pretty vulnerable spot for them. And they're sharing all of their deepest, darkest thoughts and feelings with me, only for them to then suddenly just leave me 2 days later. I will go back to the same answer that I had with the previous question. Why would they do that? Because it is too uncomfortable for them. And it's pretty jarring to think that you've just gotten this deep and close with someone and they've just bounced. And by the way, if a lot of you feel quite scared, to even allow yourselves to get that close and intimate with another person because you're worried they're going to bounce and leave you, fair enough. I don't blame you. But there's only one kind of person who would ever do that, and that is someone with a fear of intimacy. They do not want you to know them. They do not want you to get to know who they are, because it is very, very scary for them, because they think that they're going to be rejected if you ever really knew what was going on inside of them. Is this okay behavior? Absolutely not. Does it come from trauma? Yeah, but that's still not an excuse. And also, like I've said in my previous live yesterday, where I was talking about why avoidance are hated, was that yesterday? Recently. The point is that, if you're someone who is trying to facilitate a relationship, the last thing you want is to have your partner who's just opened up with you abort immediately after. It's not okay. And frankly, a lot of these people deserve the hate they get as a consequence of this, because it's bullshit. Right, next person. The fearful avoidant in my life grew up parentless. She left to me to return to her ex-husband, who is a user and is emotionally abusive. Of course she did. The reason she stated was I would be fine on my own, but was worried what he would do without her. Safe to assume that since he needs her more than she believes, she won't experience abandonment again. That's not wrong. You're absolutely right about that. But the reason I said, of course, she returned to her needy, problematic ex-boyfriend is because there's a few layers to this. You're absolutely right that she's a fearful avoidant. It's in that she's probably grown up with very, very, very dysfunctional and overbearing caregivers. Even if they were absent, there's probably been something in like the family at one point where there was probably a lot of stuff that she felt like she had to deal with. Maybe like looking after siblings, for instance. And now, as a consequence, she feels like she has to look after difficult people. That is her comfort zone internally. Even if she, complains to the high heavens about how, it's really hard to deal with these difficult, toxic people in her life, why does she go back to them? It seems to me that is her comfort zone, and that is what she's used to. And for her, she would much rather engage with someone who's a very difficult human being, and also because he's not going to leave her, and she probably feels better for being useful for him, even though this isn't a relationship built on love. It's a relationship built on ego. It's a relationship built on, well, I feel good looking after this person who's going through mental health struggles. You're not really helping them. You're just enabling them. So a lot of the time I find a lot of fearful avoidance will pick out very needy, seemingly helpless partners to help out, because it gives them an ego boost, and it means they don't have to be with someone who actually gets to know them properly. So very common, not okay sort of behavior. All right, I'm going to do 2 more questions, and then I'm going to round out because my voice is about to die and I have clients that I need to speak to tonight. I don't want them thinking that I am mute as a consequence. All right, I'm going to see if there's anything else here. My ex was doing things to help my family after the breakup, while hiding a rebound after an abrupt end in a long-term relationship. He said he just needed time. Guilt? Yeah, I'd say guilt could also be synonymous for shame for him, but I'm also not surprised that he was, hanging out with your family off the back of that, because it seems to me like he couldn't handle leaving you completely. When I say I'm not surprised, I want to make it clear it's still not okay behavior. If you've had a breakup with someone, I don't think you should be hanging out with your ex's family. If he's still doing that, it's because he did not feel good about having a complete cut. He wanted to still have a degree of access to you, maybe to your family because they were validating to him, maybe because your family was also giving him something that he didn't have from his own family, but he shouldn't have access to your family. And he should be moving on properly, which is healing, taking time away. And also, if he's somehow trying to have his cake and eat it too by being with your family and then rebounding into with someone else, that's offensive. It's like, bro, get away from me. If you want to rebound, do your own thing. Go ahead and be with someone else. But do not stick around with my family just so you feel better about yourself. So, yeah, that's pretty shitty behavior. All right, 1 more, and then I'm going to call it a day, and then I'm going to come back again when my voice is not about to die. I think I can see 1 more person. Ex ended things with the reason that people at our job found out about us. She said she wanted her privacy. Rebounded with another of our co-workers 2 weeks later in a very public fashion, where everyone at work actually knew about them. What gives? Pettiness? or she was just trying to get a rise. So let me just read this again. X ended things with the reason that people at our job found out about us. She said she wanted her privacy. She rebounded with another one of our co-workers 2 weeks later in a very public fashion where everyone at our work actually knows about them. What gives? Is this pettiness or is this trying to get a rise? To me, it seems like the issue of privacy was not really the issue there. To me, it seems like there was something she was uncomfortable about in her relationship with you. And I don't think it was about you specifically, meaning I don't think it was about you being a bad person. I suspect it was because she just didn't feel comfortable being in a relationship with you. And it was likely a self-esteem thing from her. And so I wouldn't be surprised if the new person that she's rebounded with is probably someone who's at more of her comfort level, so to speak. This is quite common for a lot of avoidance to do this. And it seems to me that this is based on what makes her feel safe off the back of her breakup with you. And it could be a little bit of pettiness. It could be also her way of wanting to control the narrative off the back of what's happened. But it's very immature behavior regardless. So that's what I would say off the back of it. All right, everybody, thank you very much for joining this live. I will see you guys again next week for lives when my health is finally recovered and I don't sound like a frog. But if you are interested in submitting your letters to me, I'd say just hold your horses for a little while because I'm going to create a space for it where you can do so, because I've got like a page coming up where you can submit and we can take things from there. Have a wonderful rest of your day, everyone, and I will catch you around later.